Dr. Jazz.
Just jump in.
Dr.
I have you on so many
Jazz.
records, and I kind of wanted to start with one of the first albums I bought was Compass, which
Oh
was
man, yeah.
years ago actually already, and I checked the date now. But like a couple of months ago, I watched on YouTube like live from Smalls, your Nanette, and
Yeah.
I just wanted to start like this talk with asking you, where are you right now as a band leader? Are you writing some new music, and can we expect something new maybe in the upcoming months or weeks, or what's the story there?
Yes, speaking of the Nanette, actually, I recorded recently. I recorded a new set of music that
Fantastic.
I've written over the last couple of years. Um, we recorded more music than I'm going to be able to fit on a record. So I think we did 10 tunes, which averaging at about, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes a tune. It's probably a few too many. So that was recorded a few months ago. It's slated to be released by Sunnyside
Oh, fantastic.
Records in June of 2023. So I have a little bit of time to kind of, I'm in the process of mixing it right now. But that's a record that it's a non-net record. I think it's gonna be my sixth non-net record, which
Yeah.
is kind of cool, I think, and most of the same personnel as the last record I did. I haven't done a non-net record in a number of years
Yeah.
because I was focusing on big band
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
interim, but it's a lot of the same folks, with the exception of a couple of people who just kind of were in my orbit a little bit more, leading up to the recording. So
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Where does the idea for Nonette actually come from? I mean, I know already the early stuff is Nonette, but and being a band leader, putting up a Nonette together for a gig, that must be like you know, making it even harder for yourself. But what's the story about the Nonette? I mean, behind it.
well, I mean, there were a number of recordings that I really liked early on, in my early kind of listening,
Hmm.
that kind of gravitated toward mid-sized ensemble. I mean, as a trombonist, I've always played in big bands from the time I was in middle school. They had, fairly large ensemble opportunities for trombonists. So that sound and approach has always been a part of my, musical DNA. Um, and I think when I moved to New York, even before I moved, I was attracted to writing for horns. I mean, it didn't really
Hmm.
matter how many, but I think there was a particular record that I really, really resonated with me early on, and that was a Don Grolnick record. Pianist Don
Oh yeah, I
Grolnick.
love this guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved him because he kind of, much like me, I think, he sort of gravitated, or maybe straddled the pop world and jazz worlds, like commercial music and jazz, and I sort of do that
Yeah.
as a musician as well. So there's a record he made called Nighttown that had four horns, Randy Brecker, Joe Lovano, Marty Ehrlich on bass clarinet, which I
Really?
thought was really
Oh wow.
unusual,
Yeah.
and Steve Teray on
Hmm.
trombone. So four horns and piano, bass, and drums. So it was a septet. But first of all, the bass clarinet thing was really cool to me, and
Yeah.
it certainly inspired me to use that in my first non-net records.
Yeah.
Actually, this last one is Chris Cheek is on it playing Barry sax, so that's a little bit different. But anyway, that record, I think really inspired me to get started. And I mean, I think the other thing I would say is that when I first moved to New York, I just I needed to meet people. I didn't know anybody,
Sure.
So
What year did you move, by the way?
in 99,
99. Okay.
and I could fit about 9 people in my living room uh, in Brooklyn. And I figured, like, yeah, what the hell? This is a great way to meet people. I'll write a few things that I mean, I love writing for this ensemble. Uh, and I wanted to try to get better at it and just sort of, almost create a community of musicians around me. So, um, that was certainly another motivation, is just to kind of create community,
Yeah.
bring people over, and not just like bunch of cats with horns, like playing lead sheets. It was like I wanted to organize it in a way that was cool and somewhat like a big band, but half the size. I mean,
Yeah.
speaking of logistics, booking a big band is a lot. No, it's a lot, but it's not too bad.
It's yeah, you're prone to this kind of bigger groups, which is like sound wise, it's amazing, music wise, like, but the other aspect, it's like, man, that's a lot.
Yeah, practically speaking, it's a handful. And
Yeah.
financially, it's like,
Oh,
it's funny. It's like doing gigs is kind of it's not a money making
yeah,
proposition
I
for
can
me,
believe.
but it does lead to people, approaching me with interest to write for them. So I
Yeah.
guess in that sense, it does monetize itself. But I guess the other, maybe I'll just mention this too, because we're on the topic of new things that I've done. The other project I recently recorded, a bit of a pandemic project, was a duo. It was a duo slash trio record that I did with my wife, who's a cellist,
Mm.
and we reimagined Bach's Third Cello Suite,
Oh man.
uh, and we brought my brother into the mix, like sort of last minute, and we recorded trio,
Ooh.
which is as easy a thing to tour with as you could possibly imagine, because everyone's in the family, first of all. And it's only 3 of us, and really it could work with just 2 of us, and it's husband and wife, so it's like,
Yeah.
man, that's about as easy as it gets.
And it's beautiful. Cello, drums, and trombone. That's a nice combo, sound wise.
Yeah, it's unusual, but
Ooh.
it turns out it works pretty well.
Yeah. Oh man, looking forward to hear that. I mean, because there's not much small band stuff which I mean, as a band leader, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and I'm really looking forward to hearing this context as well. So
Yeah, it's something I want to do more of for sure. More small band playing. And I would like to make just a straight up sort of quartet slash
oh,
quintet record at some point.
that'd be
Um,
amazing. You know, like Ad Newmeister, kind of that type of vibe. I love that stuff when it's just like trombone, piano, bass, drums, and it's just like, wow.
it's great. Yeah, I know.
I
It's so
love that
great.
stuff. Yeah. But you mentioned like Don Groening's record, but and mentioning that like always gravitated to this kind of mid-sized groups that attracted you. Like, what was it like? I guess late 80s or mid 90s, jazz-wise, that you said like, shit, I want to do that. Like, do you remember a record or a moment, like, or a player who actually that you
Yeah,
decided?
there were a lot of records that were inspiring, that were made by a bunch of dead people, and a lot of records that were made by a bunch of living people.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that in terms of like the really pivotal records for me, I would say it's hard to pick a Keith Jarrett record, but certainly like any given Keith Jarrett trio, and one in particular was the box set he made live at the Blue Note.
Oh yeah, yeah,
There
yeah.
was like 8 discs. I totally absorbed that.
That's killing.
That was one of my all-time favorites. And there, a lot of the Miles records in particular, probably My Funny Valentine, the album with Tony Williams and George
Yeah.
Coleman and so forth. But I mean, okay, and Coltrane Sound. I mean, those are sort of typical, I think, high canon records. But I think the ones that really inspired me of like living musicians were people, and certainly a motivation to move to New York was I mean, speaking of Chris Cheek, he had done a record in the late '90s called Vine that
Yeah, I love
I
that one.
just fell in love with.
Yeah.
And there was somebody I'd heard, John Gordon, who plays
Mm-hmm.
my nonet now. I seem to like really grab, I found these records and, a lot of stuff Bill Charlap was doing, I really liked. There was a band called One for All that had Jim Rotundi
Yeah.
and Steve Davis. And, I mean, a lot of really inspiring records coming out at that time that, made me want to, they're really inspiring, and it was sort of the sound that I was looking for to incorporate into my music. And I wasn't really hearing it where I was in LA at the time. So I felt like I just needed to go where it was, and so I did. Mark Turner, a lot of those folks from that time period.
Yeah.
I mean, who are still obviously, very much active. Were making records that were inspiring, and the other ones. Probably one of my biggest heroes is Bill Frisell.
Mine too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was always like, simple but complex, really communicative. His music seemed to always have a high degree of improvisation, but always accessible.
Yeah.
And he always hired interesting left of center players that I really enjoyed. You didn't really know what to expect, but it always seemed to resonate with me. It never seemed weird for weird's sake. It was like, wow, this is really good music.
Yeah, like that quartet with Curtis and Ron Miles. No, who was it? Yeah, I think it was Ron Miles, Curtis, and
there's a great record called Blues Dream.
Yeah, also, yeah.
And one of my favorites was the that it came right before that, called This Land.
Yeah.
Again, 3 horns and bass and drums and guitar. It's that horn thing. It was like really interesting to me. It was those folks. Don Byron, who and
Billy Drews, right? I think.
Billy Drews, and just all 3 of them were just so great as a unit, as an ensemble, but then individually also were just really compelling.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, okay. Yeah, he's also like one of those guys that actually music with him, if you speak to him or like listen, there's no ego. It's always serving the music, even he might have like one solo and it doesn't even matter, but when you hear the whole picture, it's just like, man, it makes so much sense, it's just
it's almost like you forget about the instruments in a way. It's like Wayne Shorter, I mean, somebody said, like I made a comment to a friend of mine recently. I said, I found this track, Wayne Shorter, he plays a great solo on it, and the guy and my friend was like, you can't describe a Wayne Shorter as great. It's like trying to describe a mountain, Oh, that's a great mountain. No, it's like way more than, I mean, you can't even put it into words, so these artists, to me, that's like that's sort of the ideal that I always strive for, where you almost forget about the genre, you forget about everything. It just sort of like envelops you as a listener. And at its best, I think music can do that.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned like being in Oakland, I mean, in LA. How come you didn't decide? I mean, you said you wanted to go to the East Coast because there was the music that was interested for you, but later you did a lot of studio work. But in the beginning, when you were like in your 20s, you didn't have this aspiration to become like a studio musician or something like that on the West Coast?
I mean, I thought about it. I was certainly heading in that direction, I think, as a trombone player.
Yeah.
I was starting to get a few things, a few studio opportunities out there. I just the music, again, it wasn't at that time, just wasn't really. I just needed to go to where the music was, where I was really feeling it. And I did, I guess, it's funny. I've been described in a lot of, whatever, not interviews, but if somebody reviews something, sometimes I'll be described as a studio musician, you know, and because I do a lot of recording, and increasingly producing and so forth, but you know, it's just one thing that I do.
Yeah.
I will say this, which is that that is one thing that I was really, has always been something that I've strived to do, which is record. I really have a passion for recording,
Mm.
and have certainly made efforts to do more studio recording. So it's not unfair to call me a studio musician. I spend a lot of my time doing that kind of work, whether it's, you know, a
Sure.
jazz record or otherwise. But it is something that I feel very comfortable with at this point, and you know the ins and outs of I think what can work, what can get you good results, and
Yeah.
what doesn't necessarily give you good results. So yeah, you know, I think LA is I think the LA scene is really great right now.
Right now, yeah, the West Coast became, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I didn't really see myself going that route at that time.
Yeah.
So, but that is certainly where the money is. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made if you were to go that route, you know.
Sure.
But you know, it's I think it's a great living, and it's a somewhat of a tight scene out there. So those that are doing it tend to do a
Yeah.
lot of it,
Yeah.
and hold on to it. And you know, you got to be a great player, very consistent. You can't be late, all that stuff. I mean, you got to have a lot of things in place that are not just musical. I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So I do go to LA from time to time to do recording projects, and you know, I do get to see those folks from my past, and sometimes get them on the project. So that's cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Now at this stage, yeah. Like, how was, you know, your brother Mark? He's one of my favorite drummers, and again, I have him on so many records. Like, how was your story together? Did you guys like play already a lot at home, like jazz wise or improvise, or like how did that go?
Yeah, we did. I mean, you know, we played. I've obviously spent more hours playing with him than with anybody.
Sure. Yeah.
From the beginning, and it was never really competitive feeling either, which was kind of nice. It was a healthy competition, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But we really feel time together, you know, and that's something that I think maybe is a defining feature of a lot of my records, is that the fact that I'm playing and he's playing.
Yeah.
It tends to be kind of a there is a certain sound or groove element that is felt, I think, in the music.
Yeah.
When you have and studio engineers have told us this, because you can see the audio file on a Pro Tools, you know, in terms of color coordination, and we start and end our notes at the exact same time.
Oh wow, man!
And studio engineers have told us, like, it's freaky. It is really. They've never seen anything quite like it.
Wow.
And you know, and that's pretty microscopic, you know, when you get down into like a, you know, a Pro Tools file. So I think, yeah, we just, you know, we're identical twins, and rhythm is huge for both of us. So we just, I think when we play together, it's super comfortable. I never have to really worry about
a
lot of things that band leaders tend to have to worry about, because the time and the tempo is taken care of, and so I can just deal with the other things.
Yeah, that's nicely put. Yeah, I mean, it's like I have to talk to Mark as well in one of the upcoming weeks. Like, I have to tease him about him being a band leader also. This is for me always, you know, what's his story there. Like, I've spoken to so many great drummers like Mike Serene, and I was like, man, Mike, come on, we need you to be a solo artist also. You're like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. So, but then, but yeah,
it's you know, it's funny because during the pandemic, when everyone had more time, Mark was writing some really cool stuff.
Oh, really?
And he would send it over to me, and I would record, you know, some things on top of it. And I think a project probably is not too far off for him. I hope. We did actually a few gigs out in LA, which is where he's been spending most of his time these days. And we, it felt great. We did some quintet gigs, like with guitar, piano, bass, drums, trombone.
Wow, fantastic!
Yeah, it was cool, and I hope we get to record something like that. And yeah, we did a few of his tunes, and they were really, really cool.
Okay, super cool. Yeah, looking forward to that as well. I love drummer-led records. They're different always, tune-wise. They compose different. I like that. It's different universe, so it's nice to hear.
Oh yeah, unquestionably, yeah.
Yeah, but Alan, I wanted to ask you. Moving to New York, you said you had like a living room that suits 9 people, but like, what was like the initial reaction when you came to New York? Like, who were the first people you connected with, and how hard was it to kind of make a name in New York in the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know. I mean, like I said, I didn't know anybody. I kind of moved to New York on a bit of a whim. A friend of mine named Matt Otto, who's a saxophone player, had called our house in LA. I was living with my brother with the intention of leaving a message for my brother because he was going to call him for a gig. I'd never met Matt. I picked up the phone and I was like, "Hey," he's like, "Hey, is Mark there?" I'm like, "No, this is Brother Alan." He's like, "Oh, Alan, I've heard about you." And we started talking. He's like, "Have you ever thought about?" I was like, "Don't you live in New York?" And he said, "Yeah, it's I live in whatever, West 19th Street or something."
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I've kind of been thinking about heading over there. Maybe moving there. And he's like, "Well, we have an apartment available in our building." And I was like, "Really?" And it was pretty much as simple as that. I was about to go on this transatlantic cruise with a band, like one of these jazz cruises from LA. And I was going to have 8 hours in New York City. So I was like, "Hey man, I'm going to be in New York for like 8 hours. Can I come over to the apartment, check it out?" He's like, "Yeah, just give you the key. It's like $100 a week." It was a week to week thing. And so I went over there and I was like, "Oh my God, this is the smallest apartment. I mean, this is like, I have never seen anything quite like this. I could touch the walls with my arms." And I just kind of was like, "Sure, I'll do it. I'll take it." And so I just moved into this tiny place. I lasted like 3 days there. Meantime, Matt was letting me crash in his kitchen in Brooklyn. He had a big kitchen. And I ended up finding a place in his building like that week. So I ended up like almost immediately moving to Brooklyn. And that's how I kind of landed there. Once I got there, basically Matt was the only person I knew. So through him, he really loved having living room sessions. So a lot of musicians would come through and I met a lot of folks. And I was proactive too. I'd go out all the time. And meet people and invite them over to play. And a lot of people would be down to play. And, I was starting to write too, so people could hear me write and play. So things happened pretty quickly. There were a lot of opportunities too. There was like, you could play.
Clubs, yeah.
I remember doing like little tiny $15 gigs, but then also like an occasional wedding or something. I got called to sub on a Broadway show. It was like, wow, there's a lot to do here. So I met people pretty quickly. Then my brother moved 3 months later, and then people were like, there was like 2 of us running around basically. So that kind of helped because people just thought they were seeing me all the time.
That's quite cool, actually.
And I think that helped speed up the process. It's like, this guy's playing drums and trombone. What's going on here?
That's a good one, actually. That's quite cool. Like, did you immediately, like, I mentioned your album, The Compass, and the scenes from an exit row was what, 2 years earlier, right? Like, how did that connection with Geordie and Fresh Sound happen, actually? And I mean, you becoming a band leader, and recording? Like how did all that begin?
Well, I mean, I did a record in LA with a sextet that I had out there. That was
Mm.
my first. Nothing really happened with it, but
Ah, really? I didn't know that. Okay.
it was like an ill-fated record label, but it's a septet record. It's not sextet, septet. Um, Although it's really just a sextet. I mean, I just added the guitar at the last minute just because he was a buddy. I'm like, yeah, come and play. Um, and so it's a pretty small band for what I do anyway, generally. And I had that record, right? I
Ah,
mixed it,
okay.
mastered it, and I sent it. So then I moved to New York. I met all these people, and one of the people I met was Alexis Cuadrado, the bass player. Pretty
Yeah.
early on, Alexis and Jordy were pretty tight, and I mentioned that Critique record in addition to a lot of other records that were coming out on Fresh Sound. I was like, man, I would love to send something to this label because I love this label.
Yeah.
So he said, okay, well, I can totally facilitate that. So I said, just can you send him this record, and he sent that record along with a recording that we had made in my living room, just of like a preliminary non-ed rehearsal that
Okay.
we'd done. Just like, check this out, and check this out too, because this is what he's doing right now. It's like a mini disc recording. And I heard Jordy, he got back to me and he said, man, I really like this project. And I think I had asked him if he would re-release that first record. And he said, I can't re-release that, but let me know if you want to do a record with this non-ed. I'm like, oh my God, that was easy, So we did. We made Scenes from an Exit Row,
Yeah.
and then we started playing at Smalls a lot, and pretty rapidly developed a bunch more repertoire, and recorded the Compass pretty soon after that. So bang bang, just 2 records right away on Fresh Sound.
Yeah.
And that really helped me get some momentum happening. For what I do, like trombonist and arranger, composer.
Yeah.
And from there it was sort of off to the races at that point. But that was the initial contact was, I guess, sort of through Alexis. So I'm always grateful for that.
Yeah. Did you ever tour with that Nonette, like in Europe also, or not?
No, never did. I mean, I couldn't really figure out a way to
Financially,
get all those people over there. I probably could have figured it out, but I mean, it's just so many people, so many hotel rooms. I just couldn't stomach that. And I was getting really busy in town in New York doing gigs, and it was hard for me to justify, I guess, my practical brain just justify like leaving to like spend a bunch of money. I mean, in retrospect, it probably would have been a good idea to try to bite the bullet and do it, but there's value to staying around and being available because other opportunities can happen.
How did you choose the musicians for those? I mean, I'm such a big fan of Bruce Saunders, and there are not so many records where he's on, I mean, of course he's done a lot of stuff, but especially on those 2 records, I love what he does. Like, and John Ellis has been, like, I think, besides your brother Mark, a mainstay, like, I think on almost all of your records, actually.
Yeah.
But like, how did you connect with John and Bruce and the rest of the guys? I mean, how did you choose the band?
Well, Bruce I met pretty early on after I moved, and I don't remember how, but we would have sessions at his place. And I just really liked how he wrote. I liked how he played. I just loved his whole approach. I loved his vibe. And so I just felt like, Bruce, man, like, this is the cat. I got to use Bruce. He was just the perfect, voice for that particular band.
Yeah.
And originally, actually, it was an octet. I didn't have piano originally. Ultimately, I included Bryn Roberts, who's I had met a little bit later. He was coming by the house quite a bit. I mean, our apartment in Brooklyn was like a halfway house for jazz musicians. Just like you just see bodies laying on the floor
Oh my
in the morning. Cats passed out. It was just like, who is that? Oh, that's Ben Monder. No, you know, just be like, what's going on?
That'd be cool.
I don't think Ben. That's a bad example. Ben never
No,
passed
no.
out on my floor.
No.
Just like, but I do remember like sitting in my room upstairs and hearing him play downstairs. I was like,
sure.
who is that, man? This is crazy. Peeked down. It was Ben playing with my brother and
Oh wow,
Street or something.
man.
It was like,
Oh,
damn,
fuck.
man. So
Crazy.
anyway, yeah, Bruce, John, I met through John Ellis. I met John through Eric Jacobson, who's the trumpet player. He used to live in New York, and he connected me with John, and John and I became very tight. He recommended me to a gig with Charlie Hunter. We toured with Charlie for a long time, and we now John and I are very tight and play all the time together.
Yeah.
And yeah, the rest of the cats. I mean, Doug Yates on bass clarinet. It's just an unusually like great bass clarinet player.
Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah, I love the sound.
Who I met at this really divey bar on that I was doing a gig at, like when I first moved to town. And I was like hearing him like, wow, this guy is insane.
Yeah.
You know, so I had to have him. Yeah, Alexis, I mentioned, you know, all these people were pretty early, you know, people that I met and who I just really admired as players, as band leaders. A lot of them had their own bands, or just as like really good ensemble players. They just, you know, they knew how to listen. They didn't overplay. They just really knew how to, they were on board with like, you know, trying to bring my vision to life in a really unselfish way. And I dug that about them, and they were individually all great too. So like as soloists. So I was like, well, this is a great way to start. And the hang was great, you know, so
that's important.
So we just kind of made these couple records, and it was cool. It's a really great way for me to, that particular band, as I said before, was a great way for me to meet people and just get a community happening in New York for me.
Yeah, that's important. What about you writing music for that band? I mean, or even now, like, how do you start a tune? Where do you begin usually? I mean, like,
well, there's a, you know, it's fun. I mean, there's a lot of ways. Like lately, I've been writing for a video game.
Really? Oh wow, interesting.
LA, yeah, it's like a first-person shooter video game. I wrote called Valorant, and I wrote a number of songs for them. I wasn't writing the incidental music, but this video game became super popular during the pandemic. So they asked me to write some like, they described it as like 70s funk as if played by jazz musicians. So
I love
those pieces.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was awesome, and they gave me really specific references. So, but they had to be original. So for those, like, I started with these very specific recorded references from, like, you know, a heist movie or some kind of 1970s era kind of jazz funk, like Roy Ayers record or something.
Yeah.
You know, or a Quincy Jones record. And I would take that. Sometimes there'd be a little motive in there that I would take away, and then I would start there. And normally I would be able to spin out an original piece that I was really happy with.
Yeah.
Other times, you know, I did a record called Roots and Transitions a number of years ago for Nanette, and that actually was all of the motives were derived from trombone, which I never did previously. I always generated my initial ideas on piano, but I decided to change it up for this record for various reasons, and I just tried to write everything on the trombone.
Wow, okay, interesting.
And it really changed everything I wrote. Everything became more contrapuntal, more melody driven, less vertical, you know, more horizontal. And so that record feels like true chamber music to me, as opposed to a little big band.
Yeah,
because Nanette can be like little big band style, or it can be very chamber music sounding,
Yeah.
depending on if you're thinking vertically, like if you're writing on a piano, or if you're thinking melodically or linearly. So I just feel like the tool that you choose to use when you write an idea down really highly affects your idea that you come up with, and then ultimately what that piece ends up sounding like.
Yeah.
So I try to change it up. Sometimes when I'm writing, I'll start with piano. Sometimes I'll start with the trombone. I'll start with a rhythm. Maybe I'll ask my brother just like to screw around, and I'll just sometimes I'll start by transcribing something I really like until I reach
Interesting. Okay.
a moment where it's like I hear something of my own springing out of maybe a phrase ending,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden it's like, I got it. Like, this is where this needs to go, even though the piece and it goes somewhere else. It's
Yeah.
an already written piece, but like there's a moment where I'm like, I got a new idea, and then I just take that and I'll run with it, and that'll be the start, maybe the start of a new piece. So I think I don't have one specific way which I start with, but I do try to
Change it. Yeah, that's smart. Yeah.
change it up depending on what I'm inspired by, or what I'm like the vibe I'm going for.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about Jigsaw also and your big band. How was the transition from Nonette to that big band, and writing for big band and leading, facing all those musicians? How was your experience with that regard? And are you still keeping up, a big band idea and composing and having something to do with this?
Yeah. I mean, I've written a lot of big band pieces since that record. Probably could definitely do a new record at some point soon. That album, obviously some of my earlier non-ed stuff. A few of those pieces are adaptations of older things that I just wanted another swing at, for whatever reason. It's not like I didn't like what I did before.
No, sorry, no.
I felt like they could be reframed in a cool way. And I mean, Gil Evans did it all the time. I mean, it's like Ellington. So I didn't feel sheepish about that. That record, there were a number of original pieces of mine that stemmed from a smaller orchestration. So I think I was in a way, I feel like non-et's a really good springboard to big band. It's and usually when I teach writing to students, the first major project is non-et, second one's big band.
Wow,
because,
okay.
Non-et's chamber music. It is one musician, one horn per part, right? There's not two trombones or two altos, at least in the configuration I have. Whereas a big band's more orchestral. You got 4 trombones, 4 trumpets. So it's just a matter of like taking the information from the non-et and then knowing how to orchestrate it in a more orchestral way without losing, I guess, the buoyancy of the non-et, and without weighing it down, I suppose. So I think when I initially adapted the pieces from that record from non-et, I definitely overwrote big time. I did big band arrangements. We performed them a few times. I'm like, man, it sounds super cool, but it's really loud, and just really dense and heavy feeling. So I think what I ended up doing as a general process is I revisited a lot of my scores,
okay,
and just it's like, okay, what can I take out? It's almost like like a
rewriting a poem or whatever.
Rewriting a poem, or a sculptor with a piece of block of marble. I mean, you're not adding marble, you have a block of it, and you got to chip away at it and chip away. You're only removing until you really reveal the figure that you're ideally going for. And that's kind of how I was thinking about arriving at these big band things, it's like, well, it's still kind of a bulky piece of marble. I can see it. I can see the image, but I don't see it as clearly as I'd like to. So like the music was already there. I knew it worked because I had done it with Nanette and recorded it structurally. Everything
Arrangement
worked.
wise, yeah.
The melodies were fine. Chord progressions were fine. Everything was fine. It was the orchestration. So that was a big lesson. It was like overwriting and then trying to then find ways to trim the fat to get to the point where it's like exactly what's needed and nothing more. And that was a huge chunk of time spent leading up to those sessions, was like me meticulously going through these scores, not only deleting stuff, but also really getting particular with articulations and dynamics and micro shaping and all this stuff with everything. Because like, I mean, I think one of the records we didn't even rehearse for.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was like we went in and it had to be, typical to my general studio musician kind of thing, which is oftentimes I'll walk in to a session and I've never seen the music. Maybe you've rehearsed if it's a certain project, but often you haven't. And the music has to be all there. I mean, not only the written notes, but the articulations, dynamics. I mean, if the intention of the composer has to be crystal clear, and the typical studio musician will play it exactly as it's written, because that's what they see, that's what they're going to execute. And so I got really in those weeds when I prepared for these albums. And then I did a few arrangements of I think I did an arrangement of a Anthony Wilson tune that was, I liked. I played it with Anthony in a small group, and I dug the tune. Clay Jenkins, the trumpet player, I did one of his tunes. There's some other things that we did on that record, but some arrangements. But yeah, it was, I was really happy with that album, how it came out. I mean, I also feel like certain things I'd recorded with the Nanette, like there's a piece called North Rampart Ballad that it never felt like I really captured it entirely when I recorded it before.
Yeah.
But when I did it with the big band, I slowed the tempo down and I chopped out an entire chorus and streamlined the solos, like, so that it was like people weren't taking whole choruses, they were taking half. And it was like, that's it. That's all it needs. It's 2 choruses total. And that was just from years of living with that tune and trying to figure out what's the best, what does the tune need? It's like, there's too much right now. We do it live. It felt too long. It's like, why does it feel long?
Funny,
and so, these are the kinds of things that I was really getting particular about.
It's like being a chef, like searching for the right, what's that needs coriander or something. Yeah. And then you got it. It's like, I like that. I love the arrangement you did years ago, like the Monder tune, Luteus, what is it? Luteus Pan, I forgot the whole, the Monder tune.
Luteus Pangolin,
Pangolin, I love that arrangement. I know the version with Theo, and then you did that one, and I was like, man, there's so much music in there,
Oh, it's an amazing piece. That's a good example of a piece that had inspired me, piece of music that was like the exact kind of thing I wanted to do more of and I couldn't find in LA. Like there's this really unusual yet sort of communicative style. And Monder, Fussell, like these kinds of people just encapsulated that. I was really proud of that one too, because I had originally written it for brass quintet, just because I was teaching at a brass camp one summer. And it's like one night I was like, had a glass of wine
and then you decided to do that tune, man.
I was like, why not? This will probably sound cool. So I wrote it, and then like the next night we went in and just went into this hall with the quintet and recorded it. I was like, damn, that sounds cool. So I ended up bringing it back to New York and orchestrating it for the Nanette, and I sent it to Ben, and who I knew at that point. I mean, I played with, and he was like, man, this is. And he's not one to just dole out compliments. He was like, I really like this,
Yeah.
And he's used
Sure.
it for stuff.
Oh, wow.
So that was really that was like a real stamp of approval. It was an honor to kind of get that feedback from the composer, because
Oh, yeah.
oftentimes
That's,
you don't always get that.
yeah. Yeah. The, you mentioned your work as a studio musician, and I didn't know. I mean, I have records of these artists that you recorded with, but I didn't know that you recorded with them. Like, on your discography, there's like Paul Simon and Sufjan Stevens, and like who I really love. And like, how did you end on those recordings? And let's say, how was your experience working with these guys? Like,
I mean, they were all drastically different. I'd have to
mm.
go on a case by case basis with each
Like
one of
how
those.
was like Paul Simon? Him being, of course, one of the greatest.
Well, obviously, who isn't a Paul Simon fan? I was really shocked when I got that opportunity. I mean, I'll say this: like, the opportunity, ironically, came from a big band gig of my own. I was
Oh, really?
playing
Oh, wow.
at the Jazz Gallery, and in the audience was a tuba player named Marcus Rojas,
Yeah, sure.
who just he loved it. He called me. I think he called me the next morning, because I didn't see him after the gig. But he was like, "Man, that was so great. I was like, oh man, thank you so much. I didn't even, thanks for coming out and blah blah blah." And he was like, "Man, that was so inspiring. What do I just want to ask, what are you doing tomorrow night?" I don't know. I don't think I was doing anything. So he's like, "Hey, do you want to?" Or tomorrow afternoon, or it was an afternoon session. He's like, "I'm doing this thing with Paul Simon, and it's like just a horn section session. Do you want to do it?" I think you're the way you think as a writer and arranger. I think it'd be perfect. Paul's gonna
Mm.
really dig it, and this and that. And I was like, "Well, yeah. I mean, of course I'm gonna say yes to that." So because he came to my show, I think I was top on his mind, and I do play classical music and jazz and everything in
Yeah.
between. So like with Paul Simon, you don't never know what it's going to be. It could be anything. He tends to hire commercial or classical musicians or people that straddle,
Yeah.
or jazz musicians actually. But yeah. So anyway, the next day I found myself in the same room as Paul Simon, and it was crazy because like a lot of the initial tracks, rhythm tracks had been tracked already.
Sure.
And we were just putting kind of horn section stuff on, and Marcus had actually written an arrangement, and it was
Mm.
on the stand, and we were ready to go, like ready to play it. Paul Simon walks into the room. He sees that there's an arrangement on the music stand, and without even looking at it, he's like, I don't want to read. I don't want to do that. I mean, who knows how much time Marcus spent on this thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? As an arranger myself, I'm like, what? You can't do that. Oh wait, this is Paul Simon. I guess you can't do that. So he just ignores this arrangement. We never played through it. I
Oh,
never even
wow.
looked at it. And he just proceeds to like start singing a line to us. And he would sing a line, and then we'd be like, okay. And then well, let me do it one more time for you. Sing it again, but it would be completely different. I mean, this was like 5 seconds later. And then he'd do it a third time, and it was different. It was like 3 different versions. He was like, okay, you guys got it? I mean, he was so in the moment that he couldn't remember what he did 5 seconds earlier. So we'd be like looking around and yeah, like this, and somebody would just take charge and play, basically what he sort of sang.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, yeah, that's cool. Okay, now can you harmonize that like in a weird way? He wouldn't use like technical terms. And we'd be like, maybe one of us would run to the piano like this, and we'd sort of really quickly harmonize it in the room while he's standing there looking at us, and we'd just play something, and then it was like this went on for 4 hours straight with
Oh,
no
wow,
break.
man.
And I was like, what? I was exhausted. I mean, I was like, what does this sound like? Because every single time we would record a fragment, it would be like that. It would be like one thing, another thing, cobble it together. Not really what he did, but kind of, and then record it and move on to the next, just sort of in the moment fragment that he had in his head. And then we finally put our horns down, went into the control room, and the engineer had been like cobbling all this together and placing it in the track. We went in and listened to it. It's like, oh my God, that sounds incredible.
That's amazing.
It's
Yeah.
like, so that's a process.
Wow. That's amazing, man.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, and Sufjan, was like completely the opposite. He had pages and pages of music written, and I did a number of things with him.
Oh,
So
really? Oh,
it was
wow.
sort of
Okay.
all this, always kind of the same in terms of process. He'd have like just page after page of notes. It was like, you can't do this on a trombone.
Oh, shit.
It's like nonstop notes.
Yeah, no
Like
breathing. Yeah.
on a MIDI file, like no problem, but we need to take breaths once in a while, and so that was a whole different thing, because we just play this tons of stuff, and then he'd chop it up and use what he would need, and he would often try to get the trombones to kind of blend with some analog synth, that like a Prophet synthesizer, and you sometimes can't tell if it's a synth or if it's a trombone thing, and that was really cool. He was super creative and also thought fast, but he had stuff written down for us, at least.
Different
So
concept. Yeah.
we had a place to start. But
Interesting.
there would be a degree of creativity in those sessions too, for sure. Like,
Yeah.
let's try this, let's go for this.
Interesting. Yeah. Two songwriters, but completely different approaches, actually,
Mm-hmm.
how to do a record. Interesting.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
different than the jazz process.
Oh, yeah.
Which is why, at first it really turned me off when I did those sessions with people. It was like, this is a drag. But then I realized, like, well, yeah, everyone's process is different. You've got to be patient, and you'll reap the rewards if you are, because
Yeah.
it's still great music.
Yeah. You learn something also, of course, yourself, and
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Alan, just you mentioned you're kind of writing new music also already, and new album coming out in June. What are for the upcoming weeks also the plans for you, like playing wise or recording wise, or
Well, playing wise, I've got I guess one of my next several gigs. I'm playing with a band that released a record somewhat recently. Ji-hae Lee, a Korean big band writer.
Oh, okay.
Who we're playing at the New York Times Center, which is a performance space in the New York Times building. That's coming up soon. Really amazing music.
So check it out.
I just produced a record, a big band record by Darcy James Argue, great
Oh
composer.
man, really? Oh, okay.
So that was a 5-day extravaganza, which is going to be awesome. And I'm playing with John Ellis, actually, in one of his bands soon, doing a tour in December with the New York, what's it called? New York Afro Bop Alliance. It's a Latin big band. They won a Grammy last year, I think. We're doing the Harlem Nutcracker, but in a Latin style.
Oh,
so
wow,
like
interesting.
Christmas sort of thing.
Wow.
So that'll be super fun. We're playing all over, and then we're finishing up at Dizzy's here in Lincoln Center. And teaching at NYU, that kind of stuff.
Super busy.
Some recordings. I just did a really fun recording with a great Taiwanese composer I co-direct the BMI Jazz Composers Workshop, and she was a workshop participant up until last year, and she wrote a bunch of amazing music, which coincidentally Darcy produced that record after I had just produced Darcy's. I was then playing, and Darcy was in the, we go way back.
When you produce a record, how do you put yourself in that role? What do you pay attention to? I mean, like,
Well, I mean, generally, I just make sure that they have everything. So, like, for instance, if there's a section of the music that they never got over the course of the 3 or 4 takes they did, I have to be the one that identifies that. And you can't move on. And if you do move on, it's just going to make it a really expensive fix in the mixing. For instance, if there's like a unison trumpet passage that's out of tune, and you don't hear it, then in the mixing they got to deal with this thing, and it's so hard to fix, and it takes a lot of hours to fix, and you can fix it, but it's just a drag because it's in the room mics, and you can't, I mean, once it's in there. So my gig was making sure that he had everything, or anytime I do this, that they have it. They have the take that really has both technical precision, but also like the magic, like it's the right tempo and the solos feel good. So I'm trying to identify this stuff on the fly. So I generally have a note taker next to me, because I can't talk. I find the mistake, I dictate it to the note taker, she wrote it down, and then there's another assistant who's giving rehearsal letters to the Pro Tools guy, who's like putting letters into the Pro Tools file so that in the editing they can just refer to rehearsal letters. Anyway, it's a lot. It's a lot going on.
Interesting. So, okay. Well, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, been a lot of cool stuff, a lot of variety lately, and it's been busy.
Any plans to coming to Europe, or?
Not at the moment, though that may change. I'm hoping to. I mean, I would love to, like you were saying before, I would love to, especially when my record comes out, I'd love to find a way to do some gigs out there with my
your group,
my band, and I do write big band charts for European-based big bands fairly occasionally. Normally that doesn't lead to me going out there, but I hope it does. But yeah, there might be some touring out there in the coming year for sure, and I'll definitely let you know.
Yeah, drop me a line. We'll meet for a beer or eat something or whatever. So.
Yes, indeed.
Cool, man. Alan, man, thanks so much for sharing some of these thoughts. So.
It's my pleasure. This is such a cool thing you're doing.
Yeah, it's so cool that almost everyone who I send messages to, they're like, "Yeah, let's do it." So it's nice to talk to you guys. Who have done so much music and should be heard more actually. So I love doing it.
Yeah, I appreciate just kind of getting the word out, because so many of us, as we create a lot of music, but it's sometimes it's hard to amplify it in this day and age, especially. There's so much
it's an overflow
released. It's like finding a needle in a haystack sometimes.
It is. It is. But cool.
So and nice sweatshirt, by the way. I'm not a Knicks fan.
No, me neither.
I'm not a Knicks fan, but I'm a huge basketball fan, and
me too.
I'm a huge Warriors fan because I grew up out there, and so we've been having some good years. But we are right near where I live. It's like minutes away from the New York Knicks developmental G League team.
Oh wow,
where they play.
Amazing.
So the Westchester Knicks, and it's awesome. It's like you can go for like $10 and sit on the floor.
That's fantastic, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously now for the Mavericks, of course, since we have Doncic, a Slovenian. So it's so much fun to see him play the game.
Insanely good. Yeah, he is something else, man. What an amazing player.
It looks so slow what he does, but it's not. It's like
Yeah, it's like Jokic. It's like, is
Yeah.
this guy even trying? I mean, it looks like it's slow motion.
This Balkan vibe kind of going on, you know, a little bit almost overweight type, you know, compared to the
It's like, how could this
other
guy
guy.
be good? I remember when I first saw him, people were talking about him. I'm like, this guy? Are you kidding me? And then it was like, wow, he's like dominating in a way that it does not look like he's dominating. But you look at the stats at the end, you're like, this guy had like a triple double, you know,
And has fun.
really quietly.
And has fun with the game. And that's so, you know, I love this, like with the Lakers when Magic played that lineup with Byron Scott and James Worthy and Magic Johnson. And Magic was always smiling. And, you know, like it was like, man, this is a fun game. You know, it's not, this is kind of Doncic vibe that I got. This.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they're smiling. They're having a good time. You know, there's a good vibe on the floor. That's what the Warriors have been like that the last several years.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
Cool, man.
All right.
Was nice talking. And
again for talking.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time and drop.